Greetings, fellow warriors. I stand before you as a samurai forged in the ancient traditions of Japan, bound by a code that has guided us for centuries. You may know us as fierce warriors, clad in armor and armed with the sword, the very emblem of our strength and discipline. But understand this, there is more to the way of the samurai than what meets the eye. The sword, though sharp and steadfast, is merely an extension of the spirit that resides within us. We are not just fighters. We are protectors of honor, keepers of tradition, and stewards of a legacy that has endured through the ebb and flow of history. Our duty transcends battle. It is a way of life, one that calls us to uphold values of integrity, loyalty, and unwavering commitment, no matter the cost. To live as a samurai is to live with purpose, guided by a code that binds us not only to our lords, but to the land, the people, and the very essence of what is just. For centuries, our blades have carved through the darkness, not just to protect, but to preserve the principles that give life meaning: honor, respect, courage. We are the guardians of a noble tradition, a way of being that has survived the ravages of time, the storms of war, and the shifting tides of culture. Yet it is not just through our strength that we are defined, but through the wisdom we carry, the self-discipline we practice, and the humility we embrace. So, when you see us, know that we are more than the armor we wear or the weapon we wield. We are the embodiment of a code that has shaped the very soul of our nation. A samurai's true strength is not in the sword, it lies in the heart, in the unyielding spirit that guides us to serve with honor, to stand unwavering in the face of adversity, and to remain steadfast in the pursuit of justice and integrity. But now, the winds of change are sweeping through our land with a force that we cannot ignore. The world I once knew, a world where the samurai were the unquestioned masters, where our code was law and our honor was unassailable, is crumbling before my very eyes. What was once a time of stability, where our swords carved through chaos to preserve peace, has been replaced by uncertainty and disarray. The world we fought so hard to protect, the order we maintained with our lives, is now being torn apart by forces far beyond our control. New ideas are spreading like wildfire. Foreign powers are pressing upon us, and a wave of change is surging through the land, one that we are powerless to stop. It is as though the very earth beneath our feet is shifting, and with each passing day, the foundation of our existence grows weaker. The values that defined us, the loyalty to our lords, the honor we carried in our hearts, the self-discipline we practiced, are now being questioned, dismissed, and forgotten. Our ways, which had been passed down through generations, are being overshadowed by new ideals, ideas that we cannot yet understand, and forces that seem to respect neither the past nor the sacrifices we made. Our place in this society once revered is now uncertain. Where once we were the stewards of peace, the protectors of the realm, we are now becoming obsolete, replaced by a new order that seeks to uproot all that we have fought for. I see this transformation unfold before me. Our traditions eroded, our role in society diminished. The sword, once our constant companion, is now little more than a relic. The world that we, the samurai, had shaped is slipping from our grasp, and the new generation born into a time of peace does not carry the same fire, the same purpose. They look to the future, but they do not see the value of the past. And in the face of this loss, I stand as a witness to the destruction of the very principles that once held our nation together. The peace and order we fought to preserve for so long. Peace forged by our blood, sweat, and sacrifices are now fading like the last embers of a dying fire. Our world, the world of the samurai, is being swept away by the tide of change, and we are left to watch as everything we held dear crumbles, helpless to stop it. Our identity, our legacy, and our place in history are being rewritten by forces that seem indifferent to the sacrifices of the past. The winds of change are not just passing through. They are transforming everything in their path, leaving behind nothing but dust and uncertainty. This story I am about to share with you is not just a tale from the past. It is the story of our honor, our sacrifices, and the struggles we faced as our world was forever altered. It is a story of the last days of the samurai, a time when we, the warriors of old, were no longer the rulers of Japan. I invite you to step into our shoes, to see through our eyes, and to understand the pain and pride of an era slipping into history. Come with me as I recount the moments that marked the end of an era, the last stand of the samurai, and the legacy that we, the warriors of the past, left behind. You may find that our story is not just one of loss, but also of undying spirit, a spirit that even today continues to echo through the mountains and the hearts of those who still remember. In the age before the sun set on the samurai, we were more than mere warriors. We were the embodiment of our land's soul, the living guardians of its traditions, culture, and honor. Our blades were sharp, our armor strong, but it was our code, Bushido, that truly defined us. Loyalty, courage, honor, and respect. These were the very foundations of our lives. The world was simple for us then, as we stood firm against any storm, guided by the wisdom passed down through generations. Our place was clear. We were the protectors of Japan, both in battle and in spirit. We stood between chaos and peace, between the old ways and the new. We were both warriors and philosophers, soldiers and servants of the code. In every strike of our katana, In every act of loyalty, we carried the weight of our ancestors, forever bound to the traditions that made us who we were. To be samurai was to live a life of purpose, of duty, and of unwavering devotion. But now, the world is changing, and with it, the very essence of what we stand for. The winds of change blow fiercely across our land, threatening to erase the world we have known for centuries. Foreign influences, new ideas, and the rise of a government that seeks to cast aside our way of life, these forces push against us, unrelenting, as they reshape Japan into something we no longer recognize. For the first time, we stand at a crossroads, faced with a question that we have never had to answer before. Can a warrior exist in a world that no longer needs him? Our swords, once symbols of power and pride, now feel like relics. The fields we fought to protect the lords we swore allegiance to all seem to be slipping away from us. Our place in this new world is uncertain, and our hearts are heavy with the fear that we may not have a place at all. As the sound of foreign rifles replaces the clanging of our swords, we must ask ourselves, is there a future for us in this new age? Can honor and loyalty survive in a world that no longer holds them in high regard? These questions echo in the hearts of every samurai who lives to see this day, and the answers are still unknown. Before we step into the heart of this story, I ask for something more than your time. This tale is not one of fleeting moments or casual curiosity. It is a journey through the fading echoes of a time when warriors lived by codes older than the land itself, a time when honor was the thread that bound our very souls, and the blade was the extension of our spirit. The story we are about to unfold is not simply history. It is the last breath of a dying world, one that fought tooth and nail against the sweeping tide of change, of progress, of a future that would inevitably reshape everything we had known. If you find within yourself the courage to walk with me through the ruins of the old ways, to bear witness to the struggle of a people who fought not for riches or glory, but for the preservation of a sacred way of life, then I humbly ask that you show your respect. Like this tale, not just as an act of support, but as a tribute to the warriors whose stories have been forgotten by many, but never by those who truly understand the value of what was lost. Share it with others, with those who still hold dear the ideals of loyalty, honor, and sacrifice, the ideals that once defined us, the samurai. Share it with the dreamers, the seekers, and those who understand that history is not merely a collection of dates and events, but a living memory, an echo of the past that guides us into the future. History is not just about what happened. It is about who we were and what we stood for. And above all, I ask that you subscribe, for this is only the beginning. The stories of our past, the lives of the warriors who shaped the fate of nations, the ancient wisdom that still lingers in the air. These are the things that still call to us from the shadows of time. Together, we will delve deeper into those stories, into the heart of what made us strong and what ultimately brought us to our knees. This journey is not just mine, nor just yours. It is one we must take together to ensure that the serious spirit of the samurai and all that it represents is never truly lost. For the soul of the samurai is more than a fleeting moment in history. It is a legacy that transcends the barriers of time and finds its way into those who still seek its lessons. Stay with me now, as we journey back in time to those fateful moments when the samurai, bound by honor and tradition, stood resolute against an unstoppable tide of change. We were warriors who had once shaped the very fabric of this land, carving our mark into the stone of history with the precision of our blades. But now we faced an enemy unlike any we had ever encountered before, the future itself, relentless and unforgiving. It did not come with the clash of steel or the roar of battle cries. It came instead with the force of ideas, with the rise of new powers that sought to dismantle the old order, and with the undeniable march of progress that no sword could halt. In those final days, we asked ourselves, could our ancient ways, our swords tempered in blood and bound by the principles of Bushido, be enough to stand against the tide of modernity? Could the values that had sustained us for centuries, the same values that had turned the samurai into a symbol of strength, honor, and discipline, survive in a world where the future was defined by machines, by rifles, and by foreign powers who did not understand the traditions we held so sacred? Could our honor, our way of life, hold up against the sweeping winds of change? Or would we, like so many before us, be swept away and forgotten? The world was changing, and so were we. Yet in the deepest part of our souls, we knew that honor could not be forgotten. It could not simply be washed away by the tides of time. The samurai spirit could not be easily extinguished, no matter how hard the world pushed against it. Even as our swords became relics, our duty remained. Even as our castles were replaced with new buildings, our loyalty remained. Even as the world changed around us, we clung to the ideals that had always defined us: integrity, discipline, and the unshakable commitment to the greater good. Join me as we relive those final struggles, the defiance we held on to in the face of an overwhelming tide, and the unwavering resolve of a people standing on the brink of a new age. We asked ourselves in those moments of doubt whether our swords, sharp as they were, could still hold back the relentless wave of the future. Could we, the last of our kind, still protect the land and traditions that we loved so dearly? Or would we be forced to witness the rise of a new world that could never understand what it meant to live as a samurai? This is not just a story of defeat. It is a story of resilience. It is a story of the spirit that refuses to bend no matter the odds. It is the story of a people who, despite the changes they faced, never gave up the fight for what they believed was worth preserving. It is the story of honor and how that honor can survive even in the most uncertain of times. Together, we will walk through this journey, and we will remember that the spirit of the samurai is not just found in the sword, it is found in the heart. And though the world may have moved on, the lessons of the samurai remain waiting to be rediscovered by those who have the courage to honor the past. In the beginning, we were born from the chaos of war. The land was divided, fractured into countless domains, each ruled by different warlords, each vying for control. It was an age of bloodshed, of constant battle. But in this chaos, a new order began to form, and from the dust of war, the samurai rose. We were not born to be noble, nor were we destined for glory. We were born from necessity. The realm was fractured, and in every battlefield, the cries of warriors echoed in the night. It was in these desperate times that we found our purpose. We were warriors bound by blood loyalty and honor, sworn to serve those who would protect the land and its people. I remember the day I first took up my blade. My father, a samurai who had served our clan for many years, stood before me. His eyes were hard, but there was something soft in them as he handed me my first sword. It was heavier than I expected, the weight of the steel symbolizing the burden I was about to carry. "This blade," he said, in a voice steady with experience, "is not just an extension of your arm. It is an extension of your soul. You will serve with it, fight with it, and if the time comes, you will die with it. You must carry your honor in every strike, for without it, you are nothing." As I held the blade, I could feel the weight of his words settle in my chest. The sword was not just a weapon. It was a symbol of our very existence, our role as protectors of the realm. Our lives were no longer our own. They belonged to the clan, to our lords, and to the land we swore to defend. The land was in turmoil, but we, the samurai, stood firm in the chaos. We were more than just warriors. We were the protectors of our lords, and through our loyalty and strength, we would restore order to the realm. In every battle, we fought with discipline and resolve, our swords flashing like the sun's first rays at dawn, striking down those who threatened the peace. "Fight for your lord," my sensei would often say, "and you fight for the land, but fight for yourself, and you are lost." We understood these words, for our strength lay in unity. As a samurai, my honor was inseparable from that of my clan, and together we stood as one. The loyalty to our lords was the foundation upon which our existence was built. We were bound not by chains, but by a code, an unbreakable bond forged in the heat of battle. And so the samurai were born fierce and unwavering protectors of the realm. We marched into battle with our heads held high, our hearts steadfast, knowing that every battle we fought, every victory we achieved, would bring us one step closer to securing the future of our people. Our swords were sharp, our resolve sharper, We were warriors bound not just by blood, but by an unshakable commitment to honor. Our power grew with the rise of the shogunate, a system of rule that redefined the very nature of governance in Japan. As the country emerged from the flames of civil war and the struggles of disunity, the old structures of power were shattered. The emperor, revered as the divine ruler, held little actual control over the realm. His power was symbolic, and in the vacuum left by his impotence, the shogunate rose to prominence, a military government led by the shogun, the supreme warlord who commanded real authority and held the reins of Japan's destiny. It was under this new order that the samurai, once mere retainers in the service of noble houses, found themselves elevated to a status beyond anything we had ever known. The rise of the shogunate was not just the emergence of a new ruling class, but the beginning of an era where the samurai would solidify their place as the political and military backbone of Japan. The shogunate, at its core, was a military government built upon the principle of martial power and the loyalty of its samurai vassals. The shogun, despite technically being a servant to the emperor, held the true power. The emperor was largely a figurehead, respected and revered, but the shogun's word was law, and the samurai sworn to the shogun and bound by duty to serve him became the enforcers of that law. We became the eyes and ears of the shogun, tasked not only with defending the realm from foreign invaders, but also with maintaining peace within Japan's borders. From the beginning, the shogunate understood the need to build an efficient, stable system to govern a fractured nation. The land was divided into domains, each controlled by a daimyo or feudal lord. These daimyo were samurai chosen by the shogun for their loyalty, strength, and leadership. In return for their allegiance, the shogun granted them power over a portion of the country which they governed with the help of their own samurai retainers. Thus, the samurai became the ruling class across Japan, not just as warriors, but as administrators, diplomats, and keepers of order. Our role as samurai was no longer limited to wielding the sword on the battlefield. We had become the protectors of an entire nation. The shogunate provided the framework that allowed us to exert our influence over the land, ensuring that peace was maintained in the face of internal and external threats. As samurai, we were expected to serve not only as warriors, but as stewards of the land. Our duties extended to governing, organizing resources, and maintaining the delicate balance of power between the shogunate and the daimyo. We were the muscle of the government, but we were also its nerve center. For the first time, the samurai were elevated to positions of power that transcended the battlefield. As vassals of the shogun, we administered justice-governed territories and were entrusted with maintaining the peace in our provinces. We wielded swords in the name of law and order, but it was the sword of authority that had become our true symbol. The shogunate gave us not just power, but a structure, an organized network where loyalty was paramount and honor was the currency through which influence and land were exchanged. But with this great power came great responsibility. While the samurai enjoyed the fruits of their service to the shogunate, they were also held to the highest standards of conduct. Our swords were symbols not only of our strength, but also of our duty to maintain order and discipline. To betray our honor was to dishonor the entire system. The shogunate expected unwavering loyalty, and to act against the will of the shogun or to dishonor the code of Bushido was to betray the very foundation of the samurai class. We were not mere mercenaries. We were the guardians of the realm, entrusted with the protection of the people and the preservation of order. The shogun's word was our law, but the samurai's code Bushido was our guide. In every action, from the smallest administrative task to the fiercest battle, we were expected to uphold the principles of loyalty, courage, and honor. In times of peace, the samurai maintained order through law and governance. In times of war, we were the first to rise, the last to fall, protecting the shogun's interests and fighting to keep the country unified. The samurai were integral, not just as soldiers, but as leaders and enforcers of the shogunate's vision. The role we played was complex and multifaceted. We were warriors, yes, but we were also governors, diplomats, and judges. Our influence extended far beyond the battlefield. We controlled the land, we governed the people, and we ensured that the stability of the shogunate endured. Yet despite the power we held our loyalty to, the shogun was absolute. We were in the end servants of the state servants to the shogunate, which in turn served the emperor. Our place in the world was not one of absolute rule, but one of bound servitude. We were to serve to protect and to fight for the good of the realm. The shogunate may have granted us the land and the titles, but it was our duty to uphold the moral and ethical obligations of Bushido that truly defined our role in this new order. Thus, under the shogunate, the samurai became more than just warriors. They became the stewards of a nation. Our power, our influence, and our way of life were all shaped by the rise of the shogunate, and in return, we shaped the very future of Japan. Our blades were no longer only tools of war. They were the instruments through which we would safeguard the realm, preserve the peace, and protect the emperor's legacy for generations to come. But there was more to us than just the sword. The blade, sharp and deadly, was merely an extension of our will. But it was our code, Bushido, that truly defined us. It was not simply a set of rules. It was the spirit of the samurai, the very essence of what it meant to live and die by honor. This code shaped every aspect of our lives, guiding our thoughts, our actions, and even our thoughts of death. It was our compass in a world filled with chaos, and it provided us with purpose beyond mere warfare. At the core of Bushido were virtues that transcended the battlefield. These virtues were more than just ideals. They were principles that governed our hearts and minds. They bound us together as a warrior class and they gave us our purpose. Loyalty, courage, respect, honesty, and self-discipline. They were the pillars upon which we built our lives. To follow Bushido was to walk a path that demanded the highest form of integrity. Our lives were not our own. They were dedicated to something far greater than ourselves, something eternal. Loyalty, the first and perhaps most important of these virtues, was the foundation upon which the samurai built everything. We were bound to our lords with unshakable devotion. To break this bond, to betray the trust placed in us, was considered the greatest dishonor. Loyalty wasn't just about duty, it was about a deep, unwavering commitment to someone or something greater than oneself. It was an allegiance that went beyond words, beyond promises, and became part of the very fabric of our being. The samurai were not hired swords fighting for gold or glory. We were men of loyalty, standing firm in the face of adversity to protect our lords, our land, and our people. Loyalty was not only to our lords, but also to our comrades and the samurai class as a whole. A samurai's word was his bond, and his loyalty to his fellow warriors was vital to the integrity of the code. If a samurai abandoned his comrades in times of danger or failed to support them when needed, he tarnished the very soul of his warrior spirit. The samurai understood that strength came from unity, and to stand together, no matter the cost, was a core belief of Bushido. Courage, the next virtue, was an essential quality that ran through our veins. But courage, as we understood it, was not simply about facing an enemy with sword in hand. True courage was mental and moral fortitude, the strength to stand by our principles, even in the face of overwhelming odds. It meant doing what was right, even when it was difficult, even when it meant sacrificing oneself for a greater cause. Courage was not reckless. It was the wisdom to know when to fight, when to speak, and when to act. It was the ability to remain steadfast in the face of fear and to face death with dignity. For death itself held no fear for a samurai who had lived by Bushido. We were taught that courage was most important in times of crisis, whether in battle or in personal sacrifice. The battlefield itself was a stage upon which we could demonstrate our courage. But the true measure of courage was seen in our ability to endure hardship, to remain true to our lords and our honor in the face of overwhelming odds. The act of going into battle was in many ways the final test of courage. To walk onto the battlefield, knowing that one might not return, was the ultimate expression of a samurai's devotion to his duty. Respect, the third pillar, was the guiding principle that governed all relationships. The samurai, though fierce in battle, were to be dignified in conduct and humble in interaction. We respected not only our lords and comrades, but also our enemies. In battle, we fought with skill and precision, but we did so with the understanding that every warrior we faced was worthy of respect. This respect extended to all people, regardless of their status. In our world, humility was revered. To show arrogance or to treat anyone with disdain was considered an affront to our honor. A samurai who spoke ill of others or treated them as inferior had dishonored himself and his code. Respect also involved a deep reverence for life itself. While we were warriors, we were not brutal savages. We fought to protect, to defend, and to uphold the values of peace and stability, not to create unnecessary destruction. In every action, we were expected to conduct ourselves with dignity, whether it was in public, with family, or in the heat of battle. A samurai's behavior was a reflection of the respect he had for those around him, for the land, and for the spiritual world he was part of. Honesty was another crucial aspect of Bushido. A samurai was expected to be truthful in all things. To lie, to deceive, or to mislead was an act that would stain one's soul forever. Truthfulness was not just about speaking the truth, but living it. It meant having the courage to face the truth about oneself, to acknowledge our own weaknesses, and to live in accordance with our ideals, no matter how difficult it might be. The samurai understood that lying not only destroyed trust, but also corrupted the very foundation of their honor. We lived our lives as open books, and our actions, like our words, had to reflect the truth we upheld. The final cornerstone of Bushido was self-discipline, a virtue that governed all others. A samurai was expected to have mastery over his emotions, his desires, and his actions. Discipline extended far beyond the battlefield. It permeated every facet of our lives. From the way we spoke to the way we carried ourselves, every action was a reflection of our internal control. We practiced restraint, not only in moments of conflict, but in moments of peace as well. Our ability to control our impulses and desires gave us the strength to remain honorable, even in the most difficult of circumstances. Self-discipline was also expressed in the pursuit of personal excellence. A samurai was expected to continually refine his skills, whether in the martial arts and strategy or in the arts and philosophy. The pursuit of perfection was lifelong, and every day was an opportunity to better oneself. This quest for improvement extended beyond combat. It involved cultivating wisdom, understanding, and a deep appreciation for the world around us. A samurai who was undisciplined or lazy was seen as a disgrace, for he dishonored both himself and his entire lineage. Perhaps the most dramatic expression of honor in Bushido was the concept of seppuku ritual suicide, which served as the ultimate act of redemption for a samurai whose honor had been tainted. A samurai who failed in his duty who betrayed his lord or who dishonored his name in some other way would take his own life as an act of atonement. This was not an act of despair, but of resolution and courage. Through seppuku, a samurai could cleanse his soul, preserving his honor, even in death. This practice, though extreme, symbolized the samurai's unyielding commitment to honor, for to live with dishonor was worse than death itself. To dishonor oneself was worse than death. To lose one's honor was to lose everything. This was the most profound truth of Bushido. A man could die in battle and still be remembered as a hero, but a man who lost his honor was forgotten forever. Honor was the bedrock upon which a samurai's identity was built, and without it, there was nothing left to live for. The sword was a tool, a weapon for battle, but it was the code of Bushido that was the true measure of a samurai's worth. It was through Bushido that we defined our legacy, that we earned our place in history, and that we were remembered long after our blades had rusted and our bodies had turned to dust. This was the way of the samurai. A life governed by the code of Bushido was not easy. It demanded everything from us. But in return, it gave us purpose, direction, and a legacy of honor that would last for centuries. It shaped us into something greater than just warriors. It made us guardians of a way of life, protectors of a tradition, and symbols of the strength and dignity that define Japan. For centuries, Japan stood alone, a secluded island nation, nestled in the farthest reaches of the East. The world beyond our shores seemed distant and irrelevant, and for us, the samurai that was both a blessing and a curse. Under the Tokugawa shogunate, we were granted peace and stability, a long-awaited reprieve from the chaos and bloodshed of the Warring States period. The shogunate brought order to our fractured land, and under its rule, Japan entered a period of remarkable tranquility that would last for over 200 years. It was during the Edo period, as it came to be known, that we the samurai flourished in a time of relative peace. The Tokugawa shogun established a rigid class structure, and the samurai were elevated to a position of privilege and power. With peace came prosperity, and we were able to focus not just on the art of war, but on the cultivation of culture, philosophy, and governance. The streets of Edo, modern-day Tokyo, became bustling centers of commerce and art, and we found ourselves in a society where military might was no longer the only measure of success. For the samurai, this era represented a time of consolidation, a period of reflection and self-discipline. In many ways, our identity was shaped by the peace that surrounded us. We began to shift from warriors to administrators, intellectuals, and educators. We upheld the values of Bushido, and our lives became centered around maintaining order and fostering loyalty among the people. Our swords were not always drawn in battle. Instead, they were a symbol of our governance and our role as defenders of the realm. However, this peace, this quiet life, was a double-edged sword. It provided us with stability, but it also began to soften us. The daily grind of governance, the focus on culture over combat, gradually dulled the sharpness of the samurai's martial spirit. We no longer faced constant wars or external threats, and as the years passed, the younger generations of samurai, born in the shadow of peace, began to lose the edge of their forebears. The art of warfare became a distant memory, and many of us turned to more refined pursuits like poetry tea ceremonies and calligraphy, seeing them as part of the noble life we had been entrusted with. The isolation that the Tokugawa shogunate imposed upon us, however, was perhaps the greatest change of all. Japan, under the Sakoku policy, closed its borders to the outside world, allowing only limited contact with foreign nations. The Dutch, the Chinese, and the Koreans were allowed limited access through the port of Nagasaki, but otherwise, Japan was shut off from the rest of the globe. This isolationism was intended to protect Japan from the destabilizing influences of foreign powers, particularly the spread of Christianity, which had been viewed as a potential threat to the power of the shogunate. For us, the samurai, this isolation meant that we were largely cut off from the technological advancements and cultural changes taking place in the West. While Europe and the rest of the world were undergoing profound transformations, particularly during the Age of Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution, we remained rooted in our old ways, sheltered from the rapidly changing global landscape. The world outside Japan was evolving, but within our borders, we clung to the traditional ways that had served us for centuries. This self-imposed isolation, which allowed Japan to live in peace for so long, began to have unintended consequences. While we lived in security, the rest of the world was becoming more interconnected, more advanced. The samurai, once the military elite who led the charge against enemies both foreign and domestic, now found themselves living in a world that no longer required warriors as much as it did statesmen, merchants, and scholars. Our traditional role was slowly becoming obsolete. Our skill with the sword was of little use in a world that prized diplomacy, trade, and industry over brute strength. The peace we had longed for and fought to preserve, the tranquility that had allowed us to build a stable society, also left us vulnerable. When the winds of change finally began to blow in Japan, they came from the outside. It was in the 1850s that Commodore Matthew Perry of the United States Navy arrived on our shores demanding that Japan open its ports to foreign trade. Perry's black ships, as they came to be known, represented the first sign of the outside world's encroachment on our isolated existence. The shogunate, caught off guard and unable to resist, was forced to sign treaties with the foreign powers, opening Japan to international trade and influence. This moment marked the beginning of the end for the Tokugawa shogunate. The samurai, who had long been accustomed to the stability of their closed society, were suddenly faced with a new and frightening reality. Our once pristine world, where we had ruled with our swords and upheld our honor, was now being threatened by foreign powers and internal unrest. The peaceful, isolated existence that had sheltered us for centuries had left us unprepared for the world that was now rushing toward us. In the years that followed, Japan's isolationist policies would give way to the rapid modernization of the Meiji Restoration, a time when the samurai would be called to adapt to a world that had no place for them as they once were. The samurai, once the backbone of Japan's military and political system, would soon find their role changed forever as the Western world's influence began to reshape the very fabric of Japanese society. The isolation of Japan for all its benefits was ultimately its undoing. It protected us for a time, allowing us to preserve our traditions and way of life. But in the end, it made us vulnerable to the outside forces that would sweep away the old order, leaving us to confront the reality that the world had changed, and that the samurai, no matter how much we longed to hold on to the past, would have to change with it. I remember the first whispers of change, faint at first like a breeze that carries the scent of a coming storm. It started slowly, rumors in the streets, murmurs in the corridors of power. The emperor, who had long been a figurehead in the eyes of the people, was returning to power. The Tokugawa shogunate, which had ruled Japan for over 2 centuries, was beginning to unravel. We, the samurai, saw this as a threat, an existential threat to our very way of life, our traditions, and our place in this world. What was once ours to command, what we had fought for and built with blood and honor, was being taken from us. For generations, the shogunate had been our protector, and under its rule we had lived in relative peace. Yet there was always a sense that something was not right, a tension between the old ways and the changing world. The arrival of Commodore Perry's black ships with their cannons and strange technology had shaken the foundations of our society. But we had resisted. Now, however, the emperor's return signified something far more dangerous. It was the beginning of the end of an era. The very idea of the samurai of warriors who lived by the sword and the code of Bushido was being challenged by forces we could not control. With the emperor's return, a new era was born, the Meiji Restoration. The winds of change swept across the land, ushering in a new government that sought to modernize Japan and catch up with the industrialized West. The samurai, for the first time in history, found themselves on the losing side of change. What we had once thought immutable, our place at the top of the social ladder, our mastery of the sword, our loyalty to the shogunate, was being overthrown by the very forces we had always viewed with suspicion: Western influence, industrialization, and the rise of the merchant class. The emperor, supported by reformist factions, began to dismantle the old feudal system and replace it with a centralized modern government. The samurai, the military class that had once been the pillars of Japan's power, were now seen as relics of the past. the government began to adopt Western-style institutions, new laws, new ways of governance, and most alarming of all to us, new ideas about war and warfare. Guns, cannons, and railways. These were the tools of the new Japan, and they made our swords look like toys. The Meiji government quickly moved to abolish the privileges we had long enjoyed. The samurai's right to carry swords was revoked. The very symbol of our status, the katana, was stripped from us. No longer were we the lords and protectors of the realm. We were reduced to commoners. Our old ways, our customs, our military discipline, everything we had been trained for, seemed to be rapidly losing relevance. The ideals of Bushido, which had once been the very soul of our existence, were now viewed as antiquated, even dangerous, in this new rapidly changing world. At first, there was resistance. How could there not be? We had fought for centuries to uphold the honor and traditions of the samurai. To have them swept away so quickly by the promises of industrialization and modernization felt like a betrayal. The streets of Kyoto, Edo, and the other great cities were filled with angry voices, whispers of discontent growing louder with each passing day. The once proud samurai, the warriors who had defended Japan for generations, were now being told they had no place in the new world. And yet we were still bound by our honor, still bound by the code of Bushido. What were we to do? The emperor's government, fueled by a desire to modernize and embrace the Western world, instituted sweeping reforms that affected every aspect of society. They abolished the samurai class, disbanded the warrior bands, and created a national army based on conscription. The samurai were no longer needed as the enforcers of peace or as the military elite. We were replaced by a modern army trained in the ways of Western tactics and armed with the latest rifles. It was a bitter pill for many of us to swallow. Our swords, once our most trusted companions, now sat idle gathering dust. We had been replaced, by our equals, but by something we could not understand. A force that seemed to render everything we were and everything we had stood for obsolete. But the winds of change did not only blow in one direction. The samurai, even in the face of such overwhelming change, were not ones to simply surrender. Many of us sought to adapt to the new world, to find a way to preserve what we could of our traditions, while also embracing the new technologies and ideas that were taking root in Japan. Some of us became teachers, philosophers, and even bureaucrats in the new government, seeking to preserve the samurai's honor in a rapidly transforming society. Others, however, could not accept this new world. To them, the loss of our status and way of life was a death in itself, and they chose to fight for the old order. It was in the Satsuma Rebellion of 1877 that the last great conflict of the samurai took place. Led by the legendary Saigo Takamori, a former samurai turned dissenter, this rebellion was an attempt to restore the samurai to their former place of power. It was a desperate and tragic stand against the forces of modernization. But despite the bravery and valor displayed by the samurai, it was ultimately doomed to fail. The new imperial army, built upon Western military tactics and equipped with modern weaponry, crushed the samurai forces. The rebellion marked the final, futile attempt of the samurai to hold on to their old way of life. The defeat of the Satsuma Rebellion symbolized the end of an era. The samurai, once the heart and soul of Japan, were no longer needed in the new Japan. The Meiji Restoration had brought with it a new order, one that valued industry modernization and the acceptance of foreign influence. For the samurai, it was a time of deep mourning, not just for the loss of power, but for the loss of identity. We had been warriors bound by honor and loyalty, but in the face of rapid change, we were left behind. In the years that followed, the samurai faded into history, replaced by a modern army, a modern government, and a society that no longer held to the values that had once defined us. Yet even in defeat, we left behind a legacy. The code of Bushido, the spirit of loyalty, honor, and discipline would not vanish so easily. Though the samurai had been swept away by the tide of history, their spirit, woven into the very fabric of Japan, remained waiting to be remembered in a world that had changed forever. The weapons we used, the ideals we held dear, everything we had ever known were no longer enough. The world was changing, shifting beyond recognition. And we, the samurai, were being left behind. Our blades, forged in centuries of tradition, once the symbols of our might and the defenders of our honor, now felt like relics of a bygone era. The world outside our borders was evolving rapidly, and with each passing day, our old ways, once so revered, were being seen as outdated and irrelevant. How could we stand firm in the face of rifles, factories, and foreign ideas? How could we, whose strength had always been in our swords and our unyielding sense of loyalty and honor, adapt to a world where such things seemed insignificant? The arrival of Western powers and the pressure to modernize had begun to erode the foundation upon which our society had been built. The Meiji government, in its relentless pursuit of industrialization and modernization, sought to adopt the very methods of the Western world: new weapons, new industries, and new ways of thinking. They built factories, created a standing army based on European models, and embraced the machines and technology that seemed to be leaving us behind. Railroads stretched across the land, and steamships replaced the old ways of transport. In cities like Tokyo and Osaka, foreign ideas took root, and Japanese society began to change at an accelerating pace. It was as if the very ground beneath our feet was shifting, and there was nothing we could do to stop it. The samurai, once the elite warriors of Japan, found themselves increasingly irrelevant in this new world. The rifle, the cannon, and the repeating firearm made our swords seem archaic, almost obsolete. The battlefield, once our domain, was now dominated by technology and tactics that we could not understand or match. The Western powers had shown us the terrifying strength of their industrial might during the opening of our ports. We had once been a proud nation, isolated, and self-sufficient. But now we faced the harsh reality that the world had changed and we were struggling to keep pace. It was not just the weapons we wielded that had become outdated. It was the very ideals that had defined us. The core principles of Bushido, our code of honor, were now viewed by many as impediments to progress. Loyalty, respect, and self-discipline were noble ideals, but they were being replaced by a focus on economic growth, military efficiency, and the unyielding march of industrial development. The samurai, who had once been the backbone of Japan's military and political system, now found themselves without a role. We had prided ourselves on our duty, our honor, and our sense of purpose, but those values no longer seemed to align with the direction Japan was heading. Our response to this shift was a complicated one. For some, the pressure to adapt was too great. How could we, who had been trained to fight to serve and to uphold the ancient traditions of Japan, reconcile our sense of duty with a new world that no longer had a place for us? To some of us, the rise of the industrialized army and the dissolution of the samurai class felt like the death of our identity. Our place in society was no longer assured, and our once proud status was slipping away. The world was changing, but we felt as though we were being left behind, reduced to mere shadows of what we had once been. Others, more pragmatic, tried to adapt to the new world in an effort to preserve what they could of the samurai spirit. Some took on roles in the new government, others became teachers and scholars, and many sought to participate in the modern economy. But no matter how hard we tried to fit into this new world, something always felt missing. The soul of the samurai, the honor, the sword, the code of Bushido was being lost in the wake of progress. The world seemed to care less and less for the things we had once fought and bled for. For those of us who could not adapt, the new order was seen as an invasion of everything we held sacred. We watched as our swords, our symbols of power and honor, were confiscated, as the very institutions that had elevated us for centuries were dismantled. The shogunate was no more, and the samurai were increasingly irrelevant. We were left to wonder, could we hold on to our honor in a world that no longer valued the things we had held so dear? Were our lives, our struggles, and our sacrifices all for nothing? This internal conflict became most apparent in the Satsuma Rebellion of 1877, one of the last standalone uprisings of the samurai. Led by the legendary Saigo Takamori, a former samurai who had been one of the architects of the Meiji Restoration, the rebellion was a desperate, though ultimately doomed attempt to restore the old order. Saigo and his followers believed that Japan had lost its way, that the spirit of the samurai, the very ideals of loyalty, honor, and sacrifice, were being eroded by the forces of modernization. For them, the rebellion was not just a fight against the government, it was a fight for the soul of Japan itself. But in the end, the rebellion failed. The Meiji army, with its modern rifles and artillery crushed the samurai forces, and Saigo Takamori was forced to commit seppuku, a final act of honor for a man who saw no other way to preserve his dignity. The defeat of the Satsuma Rebellion marked the end of the samurai as a military force. It was the end of an era, the death of a way of life that had defined Japan for centuries. And yet, despite the loss of the samurai's military power, the ideals of Bushido did not vanish completely. Even in the face of rifles and factories, the spirit of loyalty, honor, and courage continued to resonate in Japan's cultural consciousness. While the samurai had been replaced by the modern army and the merchant class, the legacy of the samurai endured quietly, woven into the fabric of Japanese society. Their ideals continued to inspire future generations, even if they no longer had the swords or the power to protect them. The winds of change had come swiftly, and we, the samurai, had been swept away by them. The weapons we once wielded, the ideals we held dear, the very life we had known were no longer enough to protect us. The world had changed, and we had been forced to change with it or be left behind. And in this struggle, we faced the ultimate question. Could we preserve our honor in a world that no longer had a place for us? Could the samurai who had lived by the sword find a new way to live with honor in a world of machines, factories, and rifles? In the end, we learned that honor cannot always be protected by a blade. The world changes, and with it, the way we must live. But though the samurai were no longer the warriors of old, the spirit of Bushido, our commitment to honor, courage, and loyalty remained etched in the soul of Japan forever, a part of its history. In the final years, we took up arms. We, the last remnants of a once great warrior class, could not simply stand by and watch our way of life be erased. The Meiji government had come with its promises of progress and prosperity, but it came at a cost. The very soul of the samurai was being sacrificed for the sake of modernization. Our swords were taken from us, our privileges stripped away, and our role in society was diminished to nothing more than a memory. The honor and pride we had carried for centuries, the very principles that defined us, were now being crushed beneath the weight of foreign ideas and new technologies. The Satsuma Rebellion was our last stand, a desperate defiance against the forces that sought to erase us. It was not just a rebellion for land power or control. It was a rebellion for something far deeper. We fought not just for the shogunate, but for our honor, for the very essence of what it meant to be a samurai. To us, the loss of our identity, of our purpose, was worse than death. It was an existential crisis that demanded action. We could not, would not let our way of life fade into oblivion. Led by Saigo Takamori, a man whose name was both feared and respected, the Satsuma Rebellion was born from the belief that Japan had lost its way. Saigo was once a champion of the Meiji Restoration, one of the men who had helped bring about the very changes that now threatened to wipe out the samurai. But as the government began dismantling everything he had fought for, Saigo grew disillusioned. He saw the Meiji leaders as traitors who had betrayed the samurai ideals in their pursuit of westernization. The emperor, once a symbol of unity and strength, had become a puppet in the hands of the new ruling class. The shogunate may have fallen, but the spirit of Bushido, the spirit of the samurai, should never have been abandoned. Takamori's call to arms resonated deeply within the hearts of those who still remembered the old ways. Men who had once been powerful samurai commanders and warriors now found themselves stripped of their roles, powerless in a world they no longer understood. They could not bear to see their families and their land taken by a government that disrespected everything they had ever stood for. It was not just a matter of loyalty to a lost cause. It was a matter of preserving the honor of their ancestors, of maintaining their dignity in the face of overwhelming change. As the rebellion began in 1877, it was a tragic and futile fight. The samurai who rose to join Takamori were no longer the warriors they once were. Their swords had become dull from disuse, their bodies were no longer conditioned for the battlefield, and their tactics were out of date. The Meiji army, trained in modern Western tactics and armed with rifles, artillery, and superior numbers, stood in stark contrast to the passionate but outdated forces of the samurai. We fought valiantly, charging with the same ferocity and spirit that had once made us feared across Japan. But the world had changed, and we could no longer keep pace with it. The Meiji government's new army, with its modern weaponry and organized structure, proved far too powerful. The battle raged for months in the hot, oppressive summer of 1877, with the samurai retreating from one defeat to another. Our last stand was on the slopes of Mount Shiroyama, where Takamori and his remaining forces made their final stand. Surrounded by the imperial army with nowhere to retreat, we knew that the end was near. It was there, at the foot of that mountain, that we met our tragic fate. The last samurai, outnumbered and outgunned, fought with everything they had, knowing that they were not just fighting for their lives, but for the very spirit of what it meant to be a samurai. The bravery of those who stood with Takamori was unparalleled. Even as the bullets and cannon fire rained down upon us, we held fast, refusing to surrender. This was not just a fight for survival. It was a fight for the honor of those who had come before us and for those who would never be able to live in a world shaped by the samurai. As the battle reached its climax, Saigo, Takamori, wounded and facing defeat, chose to end his life through seppuku, a final act of honor for a warrior who could not bear to live in a world where the samurai had fallen. His death marked the end of the rebellion and the last flicker of the samurai's military power. His spirit, however, lived on in the hearts of those who had followed him, who had fought with him. It was a tragic conclusion to a noble cause, but it was also a poignant reminder that the samurai, even in their final hours, would die with honor rather than bow to the forces of change. The defeat of the Satsuma Rebellion was the final nail in the coffin of the samurai. The Meiji government, victorious in crushing the rebellion, solidified its control over Japan and ensured that the old ways would never return. The samurai, the warriors who had shaped Japan for centuries, were no longer needed in this new world. The swords we once wielded with pride now rusted in the corners of history, replaced by rifles, cannons, and new ideas. The spirit of Bushido, while still cherished by some, was relegated to the past, a memory of an era gone by. But even in defeat, the samurai left behind a legacy that could not be erased. The ideals of Bushido honor, loyalty, courage, and discipline still reverberated through the hearts of the people, influencing Japan in ways that could not be measured. The Meiji Restoration may have destroyed the samurai as a class, but the essence of the samurai spirit continued to inspire future generations. Even as we fell, the very principles that had defined us, our sense of honor, our courage, and our unwavering loyalty to our ideals, remained part of Japan's soul. The Satsuma Rebellion was our last stand, a final testament to the samurai's refusal to surrender their way of life. We fought not just for land or power, but for something deeper, something eternal, the preservation of our honor, our identity, and the very essence of who we were as warriors. Our swords were no match for the modern army, and many of us fell. It was an agonizing realization, one that we could not deny, though we fought against it with every fiber of our being. We, the warriors, who had once dominated the battlefield, who had stood as the stalwart guardians of Japan for centuries, were now powerless in the face of an army armed with rifles, artillery, and foreign tactics. Our traditional methods, once unassailable, had become obsolete. The world was changing, and with it, our place in it. We had no choice but to witness the fall of the samurai, the very class that had built the foundations of Japan's power, as the Meiji government crushed the last remnants of our influence. The rapid rise of industrialization, the adoption of Western military technologies, and the centralization of power in the hands of the new imperial government made our role as warriors increasingly irrelevant. Once we had been feared across the land, but now we were seen as obstacles to progress. The values we had held dear, loyalty, honor, and martial skill, were dismissed as relics of a more primitive age. The Meiji government had not only dismantled our privileges, but it had also stripped us of our very identity. No longer were we the sword bearers and the ruling elite. Now we were the dispossessed. The samurai class was abolished, and many of us were relegated to the status of commoners. The noble houses we had once served were weakened, and our lands were redistributed. Our swords, symbols of our identity, our honor, were taken from us, rendered useless in the face of modern rifles and cannons. The very essence of what we had fought for was being erased by the forces of change. What could we do? The world had moved on, leaving us behind in its wake. We had once seen ourselves as the embodiment of Japan's spirit, the protectors of its soul. But now we were forced to confront the truth. The future belonged to others. The new government, in its quest to modernize and make Japan competitive with the Western powers, saw us as relics. The government needed men who could lead an industrialized nation, not men who held on to old ways of thinking, old ways of fighting. The swords we carried, which had once been the pinnacle of our strength, were now only reminders of a lost era. Many of us, unable to accept the loss of our identity, became wandering ghosts in a rapidly changing world. The honor we had spent our lives cultivating seemed to count for nothing in the face of progress. We had been taught to uphold Bushido, to stand firm in our principles, to fight for what was right, to die with honor if necessary. But now, as we watched the fabric of our society unravel, we found ourselves asking, what good was our honor in a world that no longer recognized it? Many of us attempted to adapt, to find new roles in the world of commerce, government, and even industry. Some of us became teachers or bureaucrats in the new Meiji government, trying to preserve the values we cherished. Others, however, refused to bend to this new world. We could not bear to see our identity stripped away. We had been born for war, for duty, and the very idea of living without honor, without purpose, was a fate worse than death. The samurai spirit was not so easily extinguished, and many of us, in our desperation, took to the mountains, plotting to restore the old ways, to rise up once more and fight for what we had lost. But the world had moved on, and our rebellions were nothing more than the last echoes of a dying era. Our final attempts to hold on to the past, to return to the time when our swords were drawn in battle, were crushed swiftly. The Meiji government's military forces, modern and efficient, proved too powerful. The traditional samurai tactics that had once been so effective were no match for the new army's discipline and firepower. We who had once controlled the destiny of Japan were now powerless in the face of a revolution we could neither understand nor defeat. The Satsuma Rebellion, led by Saigo Takamori, was the last great stand of the samurai. It was a tragic and futile effort to reclaim our honor, to show the world that the samurai were not just warriors, but symbols of Japan's soul. We fought valiantly, but we were outmatched by modern weapons and superior strategy. When the rebellion was crushed, the last remnants of the samurai were scattered, and the dream of restoring our old way of life was extinguished. The fall of the samurai was not just a political defeat, it was a cultural and spiritual defeat. Our way of life, which had been forged in the fires of war and loyalty, was swept away in a tide of industrialization and westernization. Our once glorious past now seemed like a distant dream, a memory of a world that no longer existed. But even in our defeat, the spirit of the samurai did not disappear. The principles of Bushido honor loyalty, courage, and self-discipline remained deeply embedded in the hearts of those who had been raised with them. The Meiji government may have crushed our power, but it could not erase the legacy we left behind. Our ideals continued to inspire future generations, even if we were no longer the warriors we once were. The fall of the samurai. A tragic and painful loss marked the end of an era. Yet the very ideals we had upheld, honor, sacrifice, and duty, would live on in the heart of Japan, waiting to be rediscovered by those who would come after us. The world had moved on, but the spirit of the samurai remained a quiet reminder that even in the face of overwhelming change, some things, like honor, cannot be easily destroyed. But though our swords have fallen silent, our legacy lives on. The final clashes of the samurai may have been fought and lost, but the ideals we upheld, essence of what it meant to be a samurai, cannot be erased so easily. Our swords may have been sheathed, our warriors scattered, but our honor, our code, the very spirit of Bushido, endures. These are not bound by time or by the constraints of the present. They are passed on through the hearts of those who still remember the old ways in the blood of those who honor the past. The world we fought to preserve, the world we lived for, may no longer be in the forefront of Japan's future, but our values continue to shape the fabric of the nation. Even as the Meiji Restoration ushered in an era of rapid modernization and change, even as the samurai were gradually erased from the political and military landscape, the ideals we held dear, loyalty, courage, honor, and discipline, remained embedded in the soul of Japan. We were warriors, yes, but we were also stewards of tradition. We were more than just fighters. We were the carriers of a code that transcended the battlefield. In times of peace, we stood as pillars of discipline and moral integrity, guiding our people through the complexities of a changing world. And even in defeat, even in the face of a rapidly modernizing society that no longer had a place for us, our legacy was not lost. It was transformed. In the years following the fall of the samurai, Japan underwent an incredible transformation. The samurai, once the ruling elite, were no longer needed in the same capacity. Their swords were replaced by rifles, their castles by factories, and their military by a conscripted army. The world had moved on, but what remained was the echo of the samurai's influence. The virtues we had lived by, the sense of duty and loyalty, the focus on self-discipline and honor, became a part of the national identity, not just for those who had lived through the age of the samurai, but for future generations. The legacy of the samurai endured in ways that were not always visible on the surface. It was there, in the way the Japanese people held themselves with quiet dignity, in their unwavering commitment to family, to duty, and to country. It was present in the martial arts, which still draw upon the traditions and techniques of the samurai, preserving the teachings of discipline, focus, and respect. Even in modern Japan, Bushido's principles can be found in the quiet strength of the people, in their reverence for tradition, and in their dedication to the pursuit of excellence. In the arts, too, the samurai left their mark. The elegance of calligraphy, the delicate beauty of tea ceremonies, and the wisdom embedded in Japanese poetry all bear the fingerprints of a culture steeped in the values of Bushido. Though the samurai class as a political entity was abolished, the aesthetics and ideals they cherished continued to influence Japan's cultural development. The very philosophy that guided us in battle, honor, loyalty, self-control became woven into the fabric of Japanese society. In the hearts of the people who still remember our way of life, our story is not one of defeat, but of resilience. While we may have fallen from power, the samurai spirit did not die with the last battle. Our legacy was passed down in the lives of those who still valued the virtues of honor and discipline. The younger generations, though living in a world of steel and industry, still looked to our example as something to aspire to. The ideal of the samurai, though no longer a military force, lived on in the moral compass of Japan. Even the Meiji government, in its attempts to modernize and adopt Western ways, could not escape the influence of the samurai spirit. The sense of honor and discipline that defined our actions in battle was not easily replaced by the new military hierarchy. The military leaders of the Meiji era, though they embraced modern technology, were still influenced by the old ways. The warriors of the past had taught the nation to value resilience, courage, and loyalty, not just on the battlefield, but in every aspect of life. These values were absorbed into the very structure of the new modern Japan, even if they were no longer explicitly tied to the samurai. In the modern era, the samurai may no longer walk the streets of Japan with drawn swords, but their spirit lives on in the way the Japanese people carry themselves with quiet dignity and strength. It is evident in their work ethic, in their dedication to the collective good, and in the respect they show toward others. The samurai were not just warriors. We were protectors of culture, guardians of values that were passed down through generations. And while the world may have changed, those values are still present today, embedded in the soul of Japan, guiding the country forward. As we lay down our swords for the final time, we know that our fight is not in vain. The samurai spirit cannot be extinguished by rifles or factories, by foreign influences or rapid change. It lives in the hearts of those who continue to honor the past, in the blood of those who remember the old ways, and in the lives of those who strive to embody the virtues of loyalty, courage, and honor that we fought so hard to protect. We are gone, but the legacy we left behind, the ideals of Bushido, endures. And as long as there are those who remember, as long as there are those who carry the torch of our spirit, the samurai will never truly fade. As I look back on my life, the years that once seemed filled with certainty and purpose now appear as a distant horizon, slowly fading into the past. I spent much of my youth with a sword in my hand, my thoughts occupied with battle loyalty and duty. I was a warrior trained to fight to protect and to uphold the ideals of Bushido, the code that defined us. But now, as I stand on the threshold of an era that no longer has a place for men like me, I realize that being a samurai was never truly about the sword. It was never about the blade we wielded, nor the battles we fought. The sword was only the tool, the outward symbol of our purpose. At its core, being a samurai was about something far more profound. It was about the honor we carried, the respect we gave to our word, and the unwavering loyalty we pledged to our lords, to our land, and to our people. Our sword was but an extension of our duty, an instrument that reflected the strength of our resolve and the purity of our spirit. And when that sword was no longer needed, when the world changed in ways we could not control, it was the honor and the legacy that we had cultivated that would remain. For even though the world no longer calls for warriors like us, the essence of our spirit, of what we stood for, remains embedded in the very soil of Japan. We were not merely soldiers. We were guardians of a tradition, protectors of a way of life that spanned centuries. Our actions were shaped by the ideals of Bushido values that went far beyond the battlefield. Loyalty, courage, honor, and self-discipline were not just principles to be followed. They were the very fabric of our existence. They were the lens through which we viewed the world. To lose sight of them, to betray them, was to lose ourselves. And yet, in the face of modernization and the inevitable march of time, we could not hold on to the past forever. I watched as my brothers, the men with whom I once shared the battlefield, found themselves lost in a world that no longer had a place for them. The government that once relied on us to maintain order and enforce the laws now saw us as obsolete. Our power was stripped away. Our lands were taken. Our swords, once a symbol of authority, were confiscated. The ideal of the samurai was discarded as the country turned its gaze toward the future. But as I reflect on these changes, I understand something profound. Our fight was never for power or land. It was never about ruling over others. It was about the spirit, the unbroken, unwavering spirit of loyalty, duty, and honor. These are the things that truly defined us as samurai. They were not bound by the passing of time or the rise and fall of governments. Honor and integrity transcend the shifting tides of history. Though the world has moved on, and though the armor we once wore now gathers dust in the shadows of time, the legacy we built remains. It lives in the hearts of those who continue to value the principles we upheld. It lives in the ways the Japanese people carry themselves with dignity, with respect for tradition, and with a sense of duty to family, to country, and to one another. When I look at the world today, I see that the samurai no longer walk the streets, no longer ride out into battle with sword in hand, but the spirit of Bushido remains. It is there in the quiet strength of the people, in their work ethic, in their reverence for family and community. It is present in the martial arts, in the tea ceremonies, in the calligraphy that continues to echo the lessons we pass down. The sword may have fallen silent, but the principles it represented are alive in the very air of Japan. In the end, I am not saddened by the fall of the samurai. I do not mourn the loss of our status, for the things that truly mattered were never tangible in the first place. Our purpose was never in the lands we controlled, nor the battles we fought. It was in the way we lived honorably, purposefully, with unwavering dedication to our code. And though the world has changed, though we no longer serve as warriors in the traditional sense, the core of our spirit cannot be taken away. Our legacy is not defined by the passing of time, by the swords we carried, or by the battles we lost. It is defined by the way we lived, by the example we set. The true strength of a samurai was never in his sword arm, but in his heart, in his unwavering commitment to his principles. And as long as there are those who remember, as long as there are those who carry forward the lessons we learned, our legacy will live on. The world has moved on, but the spirit of the samurai, our honor, our code, our strength of character remains. It is woven into the very fabric of Japan, etched in the hearts of those who honor the past and strive to live by the ideals we held so dear. And that, I believe, is the true immortality of the samurai. Our age is gone. The samurai are no more, and yet we live on. We are no longer the warriors who once roamed the battlefields, the lords who governed vast lands with sword in hand. Our era of honor, of power, has come to an end, and with it, the samurai have faded from the world. But though we no longer wield the blade, our presence endures in ways that cannot be measured in terms of time or status. The world that we helped shape has changed beyond recognition. The Meiji Restoration swept away the old order, and with it, the samurai were cast aside like a discarded relic of the past. Our swords are gone, our castles are abandoned, and our class has been erased. But our true strength was never in our swords, nor in our position in society. It was in the heart, in the principles we lived by: loyalty, honor, courage. These are not bound by time or circumstance. They are timeless, unyielding, and they remain within the very culture that rose from the ashes of our downfall. We taught the world the value of self-discipline and the power of an unshakable spirit. Our strength was not in what we took, but in what we gave to our lords, to our land, and to each other. Our sacrifices built the foundations upon which the modern nation of Japan was built. In our decline, Japan was reborn, but the ideals we instilled are still embedded in the heart of the nation, influencing its people, its culture, and its future. Even in our absence, we are present. in the martial arts that continue to carry our traditions forward, in the stoic resilience of the Japanese people, in the reverence for ancestors that remains at the core of their identity we live on. We were not mere warriors. We were the stewards of an idea, the guardians of an honor that transcends time. Our legacy was never about military power. It was about living with integrity, maintaining one's honor, and protecting the ideals that make a nation strong. Though we may no longer stand as the warriors we once were, our lessons persist in every life lived with honor, in every heart that understands the value of loyalty and courage. The samurai are no more, but our spirit has not died. It lives on in the very culture that was forged in our fires, in the lives of those who still remember our ways, and in the hearts of those who continue to strive for honor and integrity. And so, as I look back on the centuries that have passed, I realize that the samurai were never meant to last forever. We were meant to serve, to protect, and to build. We were not eternal, but the legacy we left behind is. It is in the very soil of Japan, in the hearts of its people, in the silent reverence that continues to echo across the land. We may be gone, but we are never forgotten. Farewell, then, to the age of the samurai. Our battle is over, but our legacy will endure. As long as those who live by our ideals continue to carry them forward, and as long as our spirit remains in the hearts of the people, the samurai will never truly fade. What is your view, honored guest? As we reflect on the legacy of the samurai, we must ask ourselves, can we truly leave behind the past, or does it always live within us, quietly guiding our actions, even in ways we may not recognize? The world around us is in constant motion, shifting with the tides of time and progress. Change is inevitable. The old ways are constantly being replaced with new ideas, new technologies, and new systems. Yet despite this relentless march forward, there are certain values, honor, loyalty, courage, that seem to transcend eras and circumstances. These are not mere concepts bound by time, but virtues that resonate across generations, continuing to echo in our hearts and minds, no matter the world we find ourselves in. Can we, in the modern world, still find a place for the spirit of the samurai, in an age where the sword is no longer the weapon of choice, and where battlefields are fought not with blades, but with ideas, technology, and politics? Can the essence of what it meant to be a samurai still thrive? Is it possible that even in a society so different from the one they once knew, the ideals they held dear, discipline, integrity, sacrifice, still hold value? Or has the spirit of the samurai been lost to the winds of change, swallowed by the fast pace of modern life and the demands of the present? What do you think, dear viewer? Can we still find the essence of Bushido in our daily lives, in our work, in our relationships? Can we embody the spirit of the samurai, even if we no longer carry the sword. In a world driven by convenience and instant gratification, where we are often encouraged to put ourselves first, is there still room for the selflessness and commitment that define the samurai? As we ponder these questions, I invite you to reflect on your own life. What does it mean to live with honor in the modern world when so much seems to be in flux? How do we hold ourselves accountable to the values we claim to uphold in a society that often values speed over wisdom, appearance over substance, and individual success over collective responsibility? How can we, in our own way, honor the legacy of the samurai and carry their virtues forward into a new age where the demands of progress often seem at odds with the ideals of tradition? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. I'd love to hear your reflections. Can the spirit of the samurai still be found today, or is it a relic of the past? How can we honor that legacy in small ways in our modern lives? Let's discuss. The samurai's journey may have ended long ago, but their story is far from over. Its lessons still waiting to be rediscovered in the lives we live today. Remember, the sword may rust, the armor may crack, and the banners that once flew proudly on the battlefield may be torn by the winds of time. Yet honor remains eternal. The steel that once gleamed brightly will eventually dull. The hand that once wielded it will grow weary, and the world around us will shift in ways we cannot control. Kingdoms will rise and fall, dynasties will crumble, and the very landscapes of our lives will change with the tides of history. The cities that once stood tall, their walls echoing with the sound of victory, will fade into ruins. The rivers that carried the dreams of empires will eventually change course, their waters flowing through new lands. Even the mountains, silent and steadfast, will erode over time, their peaks softened by the unyielding passage of centuries. In this great unfolding of time, we too are but fleeting figures. Our lives, like the lives of those who came before us, are but brief moments in the grand tapestry of history. We are born, we live, and we pass, leaving behind echoes of our deeds, whispers of our ambitions. Yet though the physical world around us shifts and crumbles, the essence of what defines us, our honor, our character, and the principles we uphold, transcends the fragility of our mortal existence. These things cannot be destroyed by time, nor by the sweeping changes of the world. They are carved into the soul, etched into the very foundation of who we are. It is not the sword that defines a warrior. It is the heart, the spirit that wields it. It is not the banner that flies above us that defines a nation, but the ideals and values for which it stands. And though empires may fall, and the grand sweep of history may wash away all that we once knew, those ideals, the honor, the loyalty, the courage will always find a way to endure. They are the thread that ties us to those who came before us and to those who will follow. The winds of change may erase the surface of things, but they cannot erase what lies at the core. The sword may rust, but the spirit it once represented will endure. The armor may crack, but the purpose it once served will continue to shape the course of future generations. And though the banners may be torn by time, the values they once symbolized, the sacrifice, the integrity, and the honor will remain in the hearts of those who carry them forward. We are but fleeting moments in the grand cycle of history, but the legacy of what we stand for, the principles we choose to live by, are eternal. As kingdoms crumble and dynasties fade, what endures is not the power that once was, but the honor that was lived and passed down through the generations. This is the true immortality of those who live with purpose, with integrity, and with a steadfast heart. It is the legacy of honor, and it cannot be washed away by time or swept aside by the winds of change. But even as the physical forms of power fade, the essence of what makes us strong, our integrity, our unwavering commitment to duty, our unshakable dedication to our principles, transcends the inevitable march of time. These things are not bound by the fragility of the material world. They are carved deep into the soul, etched into the very spirit of those who choose to live by them. They are not subject to decay, nor can they be lost in the chaos of change. Honor, like a flame that refuses to be extinguished by the winds of uncertainty, remains steadfast. Our code, our way of life, is something that no amount of time, no revolution, no new age of technology or war can erase. It endures, not as a relic of the past, but as a guiding light, living on in the hearts of those who remember, who continue to walk the path with courage, discipline, and an unwavering sense of duty. Though we may no longer wield the sword, our spirit is carried forward by those who understand that true strength is not in the blade, but in the heart. And as long as there are those who live with honor and integrity, the essence of the samurai, our legacy will never fade. It is eternal, a beacon to guide future generations, a reminder that the noblest of virtues are not found in power, but in the strength of character that remains unbroken through the ages. As the samurai learned, the sword is not the source of a warrior's strength, it is the spirit behind it. Our greatest weapon was never the blade we carried. It was the honor that guided our every action, the code that shaped our hearts, and the courage that carried us through even the darkest of times. The sword may rust, but honor is indestructible. It is the legacy that lives on long after the warrior has passed from this world, passed down through the generations in the form of stories, teachings, and the silent actions of those who live with integrity. The world we live in is constantly changing, just as Japan itself changed, and the ways of the past are often swept aside in the pursuit of progress. Yet the values that sustained the samurai, the virtues that stood at the heart of our way of life, are not confined to a bygone age. They are ageless, existing in every moment of decision, in every act of kindness or sacrifice, in every choice made with wisdom, courage, and honor. Though the samurai, as a class, may no longer walk the earth, their spirit lives on in each person who chooses to walk with integrity, to fight for what is just, and to hold steadfast to the principles of loyalty and honor, even when the world around them falters. As you walk your path through life, remember that honor is not a destination. It is a way of being. It is not found in the accolades of others, nor in the recognition we receive, but in the quiet conviction that guides our actions, and the dignity with which we carry ourselves, and in the choices we make when no one is watching. The true measure of a person is not in their ability to wield a sword, but in their ability to wield their honor with unwavering resolve. In times of peace, as in times of battle, let your actions be guided by the wisdom of those who have come before you. Let courage, not fear, guide your decisions, and let loyalty to what is right be the compass that directs you even when the road is uncertain. Just as the samurai were taught to stand firm in the face of overwhelming odds, so too should you face life with unwavering strength. Life will challenge you, test you, and push you to your limits. But if you remain true to your values, true to the honor you carry within you, you will find your way, no matter how dark the path may seem. The spirit of the samurai lives on, not in the echo of battle cries, but in the quiet strength that arises from living with purpose, from acting with integrity, and from facing every challenge with a heart full of courage. Even in the most modern of worlds, where the pace of life is frantic and the demands of the present seem overwhelming, there is still room for the values of Bushido to guide us. They are as relevant today as they were in the days of the samurai, for the essence of honor does not fade. It evolves quietly woven into the everyday choices we make, in the way we carry ourselves, and in the way we treat those around us. Until we meet again, may your path be guided by the wisdom of the ages, by the courage to face each new day with an unshakable resolve, and by the spirit of the samurai that resides not only in the warriors of the past, but in all who live with honor and strive to embody the ideals of courage, loyalty, and self-discipline. May your heart be steadfast, your mind clear, and your actions true. The journey of life, like the life of a samurai, is one of constant growth, constant learning, and constant commitment to what is right. And in this journey, may you always walk with the strength that comes from living with honor and from carrying forward the spirit of those who came before you. The sword may have fallen silent, but its true power lies in how we live. The legacy of the samurai is not in the blade, but in the way we wield the virtues of Bushido in our daily lives. Honor, loyalty, courage, and wisdom. These are the true weapons of the heart, and they are forever. May your rest be as peaceful as the calm after a storm, and your dreams as steadfast as the samurai's resolve. As you close your eyes tonight, remember the strength that resides within you, the courage to face any challenge, and the honor in every choice you make. Just as the samurai found peace in the quiet of the night, may you find rest and renewal in the stillness of the hours ahead. Sleep with a heart full of honor, and may the spirit of the samurai guide you through the night. When you awaken, may you rise with the same strength, courage, and integrity that we the samurai carried in our hearts. Good night, and may your dreams be filled with peace, purpose, and the eternal spirit of Bushido.